Hello and welcome to another one of my walk and talks. The Truth of Being in a Band series. This is the first one I've done for a little while. And as you can see, I'm in my Hawaiian shirt because the sun is shining. It's the hottest week of the year so far in the UK, so it could last days, literally days. So, but anyway, I've got my much hated hat. It seems to be hated through the internet, but I don't care, I like it. But I thought today I would talk about the state of the music industry in general, certainly from a point of view of being an artist. Because it's we know how much it's changed, we know how much the internet has affected the differences, specifically of how guitar music is being regarded. And I think perhaps the best place to start is to talk about my own experiences of being signed back in the day in the 80s, and we can compare the difference to now. Okay, so when I was a kid, when I was 19 years old, Little Angels were just like a lot of bands of that era, looking for a record deal. And we were in an extraordinary time, as we know, of interest in guitar music. I'm talking sort of middle to the late 80s, 85, really 86 is when we began, and we were looking for our route in. And it was just around that time that, of course, Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, Van Halen, Scorpions, etc., were, the sound du jour, as I used to say, the sound of the day, and it was what was extraordinary about that period really was the fact that up until that point the UK had been dominated by dance music really, and all of a sudden out of the blue, well, certainly I guess alternative dance orientated music, disco, etc., but out of the blue, specifically Bon Jovi arrived with initially Runaway, which was a brilliant song, of course, and then the Slippery and Wet album, You Give Love a Bad Name, and overnight sort of changed the environment, which was wholly unexpected in lots of ways. But the reason why they were able to is because they had the support of a massive record label, Phonogram, who are part of now the Universal Group, who own many labels under their umbrella, Polydor being one of them, Mercury Records, etc. So there was real support there from a huge record label, worldwide, internationally successful record label that had, amongst anything else, the money. Yes, of course, they also had the expertise, and herein lies the rub, because when I first, Little Angels, obviously I was part of that band, signed to Polydor Records, we were in the company of some really extraordinary people that had been in the record industry for decades, who had been involved with managing bands, who themselves had been producers, or at the very least they had been involved in the early evolution of an industry that was based in the concept that it was new. The record industry from the late 60s, when it started to really erupt, and lots of bands got signed, and all of a sudden what we now regard as the stadium rock band era began to take flight with bands like Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, etc. And so that pedigree of people came from that early flush of excitement of how to construct an industry that was virtually new, and how to put it into some kind of format that would allow a huge audience to be built, which is exactly what they did. And it was because of these fantastic thinkers and great A&R people. I mean, you've heard of me talk about A&R before. Well, let's just examine that a little bit. Right, A&R, let's get this down to brass tacks. A&R stands for Artist and Repertoire, and it used to be a kind of gatekeeper thing. So you'd get signed like we did to Polydor Records, and you were assigned a team of people, specifically an A&R sort of manager, if you like, whose principal job was to help the band and its team figure out the music that you were making and how they were going to use that music, and how they were all going to put together a plan to use that music to develop the band and to gain success with that music. And so it was about discussion about the direction of the music, who was going to be involved in producing that music, if there was any co-writers involved, and it was all kind of joined up thinking with the rest of the creative team at the record label, with the marketing people, with the radio pluggers, etc. So it was kind of like the sharp end of the stick, that you had this relationship that allowed for development and allowed for conversation and discussion about what the music meant, and where it was going to go. And this, of course, went down through your career. So there was a connection between what you'd done before, what you were going to do next, and how you were going to progress. And those conversations were important. Now, I don't think our experience of A&R was particularly fantastic at Polydor. And I think this was mainly to do with a kind of clash of personalities more than anything else. But we did have it. And we did have those conversations that were often quite difficult. And I can remember being sat around tables discussing what the next single was going to be, and having arguments with the A&R team and Polydor, or at least conversations with A&R and Polydor and the marketing people. And you know, and it was quite difficult sometimes. But that's in a way good, because, well, of course it's good, because if you're to be questioned about your choices is, well, it does two things, doesn't it? One of two things. It kind of validates those choices by how fervent you feel about them, how positive, how confident you feel about them, or it makes you challenge them yourself, where you might change your mind because other people have got a different perspective. And sometimes that can be right, and sometimes that can be wrong. The point is, we weren't alone in the label. And my experience of Polydor, even though I don't think they got it all right, but how the hell could they, was very positive. We had some great allies in that record label, wonderful marketing people that really believed in the band, really loved the band, wanted to see us succeed, and led that way with a massively positive attitude, and treated us, you know, like with a great deal of respect, like we really were, you know, serious musicians, because we were making music that did get in the charts. I mean, let's not forget, from our own point of view, you know, we had 10 top 40 hit records and a #1 album with a jam album. Now, you can't do that without, you know, having hopefully the talent, but B, the capability through experience and through evolution. But also, you can't do it without the support of others. But again, let's get down to brass tacks. A massive part of the reason why Little Angels and an awful lot of other bands of that era, such as the Choir Boys, Thunder, you know, the Almighty, and I'm only obviously talking about the British scene, but a lot of the reason why we all had those sort of halcyon days of success when we were in the charts is because simply they had the money. They had that huge, you know, bankrolling capabilities of being able to buy space in magazines, to be able to pay for expensive videos, you know, to be able to put out, you know, campaigns that were involved hundreds of people up and down the country to plug the band, to be able to get us on TV, etc. None of this stuff is cheap. None of this stuff just happens. It happens because the marketing team is clever and determined and goes in and sells the band directly to all of these compartments, because you need all of these things firing all at the same time. You need the magazines, you need the radio, you know, you need the live scene happening. You need to have, at that time, you know, poster campaigns, very prevalent. You got to remember, there wasn't the internet at the time. There wasn't, social media was not a thing. Of course it wasn't. You know, it wasn't even invented. You know, and so it was traditional roots. You know, you had to be in the magazines having an interview. You know, you had to got great reviews for your singles, these sorts of things, which, you know, wasn't always the case. And so it was a kind of battle, but it was supported by a massive financial sort of capability of those labels. Now, of course, all of these things have to work in concert. You know, the band have to be good enough in the first place. You have to be writing decent enough tunes, and you have to be producing decent enough music. Because none of the marketing really is going to work if you're polishing a turd, frankly, you know. And I do think, you know, from Little Angel's point of view, we got a lot of that right. And I think the marketing of the band, even though a lot of people decry it and say, oh, you were kind of a pop band really, you weren't really a rock band. Well, yeah, we kind of were. But that got us on to the TV shows. It got us into places that perhaps lots of other bands that were tougher than us, if you like, harder than us, harder rock than us, couldn't get, Now, it stymied us a little bit. We didn't end up playing Monsters of Rock, for instance, because I think we were just too lightweight for that. But we did go on tour with Van Halen and Bon Jovi, Marillion, and all these other huge acts, Bryan Adams, where we played Wembley Stadium, etc. Now, none of these things could have happened without the support and cooperation and a collaboration between the band, our team, and with the record label. And then, of course, knowing full well that the record label was willing to spend the money on us. Because it is that simple. You have to be able to have that huge support. I guess the other thing that we need to mention at this particular juncture in this conversation is that you're talking about fashion in lots of ways. And the record industry is not one, in lots of ways, to lead that fashion, really. And, there has to be a kind of breakout act, that sort of takes on the whole concept and usurps it in a way they didn't expect. And usually that's down to somebody taking a risk. There used to be risk takers in the record industry. There used to be people that would say, the A&R executives who go out and find the scouts that find these bands, that would probably have taken a band into their manager and said, look, I really believe in this band. I think they can do something. And often, movements happen when something new clearly appears out of nowhere. And you can cite lots of examples of that. You have to think something like the Sex Pistols, for instance, and their history, how they, even though it was short-lived, they sort of turned the whole thing on its head, the whole industry on its head, by bringing a fresh new look and a sound to what really was a moribund, boring record industry at the time, and so. But I know, that whole story is one of struggle and oddity. They were a crazy bunch, but they knew they had something special. And Malcolm McLaren was a very clever manager who was able to sell the band and etc. But it took risks. It took a record company to risk that, because record companies aren't great at risk. They're quite happy to sort of jump on the bandwagon and milk it for all it's worth. But it takes a special, clever person or group of people to discover something new and take a risk. And this is part of the problem. All of the risk has kind of gone out of the record industry. Now, I'm not saying Little Angels were a risky band. We weren't. We were part of that, bandwagon jumping thing that happened when Bon Jovi happened. Arguably you could say that Def Leppard were a bit of a risk when they first got signed. Bon Jovi probably were as well, but they were, the point is that they had great songs. All these bands had great songs, and the record industry did take a chance. And of course, it galvanized a movement, and it developed that movement, and we were part of that movement. And so we rose through those ranks based on the principle that we were part of an evolving, already established, familiar sound. And I don't mind admitting that at all. We rode on the coattails of people like Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and Van Halen, of course. But it is a really important point, that it has to start somewhere, and somebody has to take that risk, and someone has to take that chance. But it is ultimately about fashion. So when the fashions come to a close, like it so readily did at the end of our career with, the grunge scene coming in, of course, another risk there. Nirvana were a risky band when they got signed, they took, changed the world completely, didn't they? But I'll guarantee you that there would have been boardroom meetings around the world in major record labels where that band got turned down more times than anyone took a chance on it, because people don't like change. Vast majority of people at the top end of the record industry don't really know what music is, in my experience. They have got great jobs because of other reasons. They may be great marketers, they've been involved in finance, or they're great accountants, or the lawyers, that sort of thing, but they don't have an inherent understanding of music. And so they have to rely upon the people on the lower rungs, the A&R order, or the scouts, to find these bands and convince them that they're worth taking on. So really, what I'm trying to say with this, I guess, to sort of finish this part of the conversation off, is that Little Angels, Thunder, all of those bands were a result of something that was already happening. And at a time when the record industry was absolutely flushed with money because of the changeover to CD, and of course there was no streaming or anything like that, so they were still in control of the distribution. There's no internet, of course, to sort of allow people to distribute completely freely. They had a total stranglehold over it. But in a way, crazily now when I look back on it, in a way that was sort of better, because the gatekeepers were there to try and find a way to sort of filter out all the white noise and to end up with bands that they could spend time and money on. Because let's not forget, let's get this down to brass tacks, it is a business, it is an industry, and none of these people are going to want to spend millions of pounds, which is what they do on bands, or certainly did back then, and take that, take that risk to a point where it was untenable. It was a calculated risk, and they had to see a level of return on their investment as it went along. And so, there's no surprise to me that the labels were cautious about who they signed and very careful about who they put on their labels, because it was an enormous amount of money to spend on anything. But of course, without risk, you don't get reward. And so, the point is, an awful lot of bands made some huge careers within that system. We didn't really, we got very, very close. We did very well, but we weren't an internationally successful act, That was largely to do with, I think, really, a number of factors. I think the American record label I got stung a little bit by various things that happened prior to us going out there. And if, for instance, a band don't lift immediately, their first single doesn't get away, like is what happened to us in America, the plug kind of got pulled pretty quickly, because they, if you think about the money that Polydor had to spend on Little Angels to make us successful, to help us become successful rather, imagine how much more, times that by 100, they'd have to spend in America.